You wake up, not slowly, not from a dream. You are just awake. Your room is dark and quiet. You check your phone. It's 3 a.m., or 2:47, or 3:12. You have seen the numbers enough to recognize a pattern. You've mentioned it to other people. You've looked it up. Your inquiry returned the same results: anxiety, cortisol, the blue light emitted from your phone, stress, or some combination of the above, or maybe none of the above. The experts don't know either. You lie there. Your mind is alert, processing a million thoughts. You patiently wait for sleep to come back. Eventually it does. You wake up the next morning and can barely remember any of it. You brush it off. Tell yourself it's nothing. Then it happens again. No one ever warns you about this. About that 1 hour. That brightness inside your head while the room stays dark. That razor-thin alertness has a name. One that predates language itself. And it isn't anxiety. It isn't a defect either. What you're feeling is older than any diagnosis. A function so old its different versions ran through a human cousin that vanished 40,000 years ago, leaving bits and pieces behind, tucked in with everything else you carry. So when you suddenly wake up at 3 a.m., it's not an error in your system. It's an inherited trait, a trait that once kept people alive. This is a story about the other humans and what they slipped into the night before they were gone. What is actually happening at 3 a.m.? Your brain doesn't sleep the way you think it does. A lot of us carry this picture of sleep as a hard stop. Eyes shut, 8 hours vanish, then you pop back online. But that is not how sleep works. It is not a uniform state. It's a repeating chain of stages, cycling through the night in a pattern so consistent that researchers can chart exactly which stage is active just by reading the brain's electrical activity. Roughly every 90 minutes, your brain moves through a cycle. First comes deep slow-wave sleep, the heavy dense phase, the stage where the brain consolidates memory, repairs tissue, and clears the metabolic waste that accumulates while you are awake. Then a lighter transition. Then comes REM, rapid eye movement, the stage tied to dreaming, to emotional processing, to a kind of consolidation that has less to do with facts and more to do with meaning. Then the whole cycle begins again. Robert Stickgold, at Harvard Medical School, has spent 3 decades trying to pin down what these stages are actually for. What he and his colleagues have found is simple and easy to miss. Sleep is not just rest, it is maintenance. During slow-wave sleep, the brain is actively clearing debris, strengthening certain neural connections while pruning others, moving the day's experiences from short-term holding areas into long-term storage. The sleeping brain is working. It is just working on a different set of problems than it does when you are awake. And that's where 3 a.m. starts to matter. Deep, slow-wave sleep is front-loaded. It is the deepest and most restorative sleep. It happens earlier in the first half of the night. By the second half, roughly midnight onward, the cycle shifts toward more REM, lighter transitions, longer stretches. When you are nearer to waking up, the line between asleep and awake becomes structurally thinner. So around 3 a.m., most people sit in a transitional zone. The deep sleep of the first half is done. The final REM periods are still ahead. The brain isn't holding you down with the same force it had a few hours earlier. This is also the moment when cortisol begins its morning rise. Cortisol gets branded as the stress hormone, but that label doesn't tell the whole story. It's also an arousal hormone, a readiness signal. Your body doesn't wait for you to wake up and then react. It starts preparing ahead of time. That rise begins around 3 a.m. By the time you hear an alarm, cortisol levels are already rising. By mid-morning it peaks, which means a 3 a.m. wake-up lands at a very specific crossroad. On one side, the architecture of sleep is lighter and easier to disrupt. On the other side, the chemical ramp that helps get you ready for the day is just starting to climb. This combination is not random, it is a design. The question is, whose design is it? And why does it persist in you, in the 21st century, in a worn house, behind locks, and with no predators outside the door? In 2017, researchers Michael Dannemann and Janet Kelso at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig published a study that used the UK Biobank, a database of genetic and health data from over 112,000 British participants, to ask a specific question: which traits in modern humans line up statistically with gene variants associated with Neanderthal-derived gene variants? The answer was not what they expected. Across the behavioral traits they tested, 4 stood out, meaning the Neanderthal-derived variants accounted for more of the variation in these traits than typical non-archaic variants did. Chronotype, how strongly you lean toward morning or evening. Smoking status, and the one that should make you sit up, loneliness and isolation. Not immune function, not skin color, The clearest behavioral trace wasn't about the body's outer shell at all. It was about how the nervous system runs at night, and what it feels like to be alone when it's dark. The chronotype signal is traced to a specific stretch of DNA, inherited from Neanderthals, that sits near a gene called ASB1, is among the clearest cases of a Neanderthal sequence tied to a behavioral trait in living humans. People who carry it report a measurably different relationship with the clock than people who don't. The exact direction they lean varies depending on the version of the haplotype they carry. What stays consistent is that the sequence is doing something real. It is shaping, in some specific and heritable way, when your body decides the night is over. That reframes the 3 a.m. wake-up. Not because the evidence says Neanderthals were all early risers, it doesn't, but that the machinery deciding what kind of sleeper you are, down to specific identifiable pieces of chromosome, did not start with Homo sapiens. It started in a species that needed a clock built for a place where summer days ran 18 hours and winter days ran 6. And where the boundary between dark and light moved every week of the year. These are not small effects buried in noise. They appeared across a sample of well over 100,000 people, large enough that the pattern is real, large enough that chance cannot explain it away. What this means is this: if you carry those variants, and if you're of non-African descent, you likely carry some strands of Neanderthal DNA, even though the exact pieces vary from person to person. Your relationship to the night might be influenced by sequences that existed long before Homo sapiens first moved into Europe. The 3 a.m. jolt, the alertness with no obvious target, your mind running a program at an hour when nothing is asked of you. It is not random. It is not a malfunction. It is a setting, a threshold, tuned by tens of thousands of years of survival in a world that no longer exists. Handed down from people who needed that setting because their lives depended on it. They didn't have alarms. They didn't have locks on the door. What they had was a nervous system calibrated to wake at the hour when the dark was deepest, when predator activity peaked, when the fire had burned low enough to need tending. Someone had to be awake at 3 a.m. Someone was. Like me, you may wonder why this variant survived. In every Neanderthal group, someone was wired to rise early, alone, in the dark, which raises a basic evolutionary problem. Natural selection doesn't keep traits that aren't useful. Genetic variants that impose a cost, variants that disrupt sleep, that create arousal at the wrong time, that burn energy on consciousness that could be spent on rest, should, over generations, be lost. The individuals who sleep better should survive better. Their children should carry the sleep-favoring variants. Over time, the disruptive variants should fade. But they didn't. Jerome Siegel at UCLA spent years studying sleep in the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations. The Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, the Tsimane in Bolivia. These groups sleep without artificial light, without alarm clocks, in conditions closer to those of most of human history than anything built in a sleep lab. What he found, published in 2015 in the journal Current Biology, was striking. Natural human sleep, in environments without electricity, is not 8 unbroken hours. It is shorter, it is lighter. In the communities Siegel studied, sleep was staggered. Different individuals had different sleep timing, different arousal thresholds, and different tendencies to wake during the night. At almost any point during the dark hours, at least one person in a group was in a lighter sleep state, close enough to waking to respond to a sound, a change in the fire, a movement at the edge of the camp. No one was assigned a role. Nobody drew up a schedule. The group still ended up covered. Siegel called it the sentinel hypothesis. The variation in sleep timing across individuals within a group may have served a collective function. Not every person needs to be the one who wakes at 3 a.m., but someone does. And if that someone is you, if your threshold is lower, if your cortisol rise is earlier, if your Neanderthal-derived variants push your arousal curve toward the dark hours, then you are not broken. You are the person your ancestors needed. Those variants lasted because, in a world where sleep posed real danger, diversity in sleep patterns was protection. A group that didn't have someone waking up at 3 a.m. was a group that didn't notice when danger stepped into their camp. Your insomnia is not insomnia. It is a watch. You have been lying awake at 3 a.m. your whole life, thinking something was wrong with you. You've probably had the same thought most people have in that hour. Other people sleep straight through. You don't. They must be doing something right. You must be doing something wrong. The wakefulness feels like a symptom. That if you just handled your stress better, or turned off your phone earlier, or took the right supplement, the 3 a.m. slot will finally stay dark. Maybe. But the research points somewhere else. Taken together, the Leipzig dataset with its 112,000 people, the field studies in Tanzania, the Harvard lab work, and the basic structure of the 90-minute cycle all suggest that a 3 a.m. rise isn't automatically a modern disorder. It can be an old function that never disappeared because, for a long time, it was useful often enough to keep Neanderthals watched the dark for 400,000 years. When their world ended, or rather when it was absorbed into ours, part of what they carried into the night came with them. Not as a memory, not as culture, but as DNA, as the threshold in your nervous system that wakes up before light arrives. They didn't disappear. You absorbed them. The next time you wake up at 3 a.m., lying in the dark with your brain quietly running something you can't name, you don't have to call it broken. You can call it inherited. You can call it a function that outlasted the world it was built for. You are the one who watches. You always were.